It is now evening, Maddrift. We had no announcement the last two light sets. Well, that's not entirely true. We did have one, but it was not an evening narration, and it won't do to dwell on what happened. But a few things do need to be discussed before I can move on to some mildly happier news for us this evening. I want to first thank the Queensguard, who have been very helpful to us in the last 2 days, and for all that they've done in the meantime, as well as to thank the enchanters for their continued work here, and of course our beloved Empress for gifting us their care. A list of missing citizens has been submitted and several have already been found, but many remain lost. The Queensguard continue to work diligently to locate those on the list until we can confirm the exact number of losses Maddrift recently endured. Please be patient in finding your loved ones. We're working on it, I assure you. Several of the buildings on the eastern edges have suffered heavy damage, and it is safer to demolish rather than repair them. As has happened in the past, the school is offering shelter after light set for anyone in need in the meantime, and the Saw Desert is offering reduced priced rooms as well. Anyone willing to foster the children in search of their guardians still will be compensated with town funds, and anyone willing to adopt those who have already been confirmed as orphaned will of course receive the customary assistance outlined in whatever contract is agreed upon during the adoption. However, with the Queensguard to be rotated soon, potentially tomorrow, and a couple of those who were intended to leave Maddrift having been lost in our recent misfortune, Extinction Keeper Lours has quite benevolently written to Her Majesty, our beloved Empress, and requested that some of the orphaned children here be permitted to ride back to Queenstown, where there is a proper orphanage that may care for them in the stead of the Queensguard, who are no longer in need of making that trip. Now, I do not like that I must say this, Maddrift, but we all understand why it is this way. No guardian is permitted to put their child up for adoption at this time. We all know there is a better life to be had in Queenstown than here in Maddrift, but if you give up or orphan your child to give them that chance in our current circumstances, there will be several consequences. For one, if you make the irrevocable decision to take yourself out of your child's life, your child will be immediately enlisted into the Queensguard roster and will undergo their training here in Maddrift under the supervision of our new Queensguard once they arrive, with no chances to be relocated elsewhere in the future. If you give your child up for adoption or neglect them so they must be taken away from you during this time, you will be arrested and forced into free town labour for the foreseeable future, and your child will still remain in Maddrift. So for the sake of everyone, including especially the children, please do not make any rash actions based on what I just said. We do not even have confirmation that our beloved Empress will find the suggestion in our best interest, and she may yet decide to reject the proposal, and therefore whatever bold and idiotic decision you may make for the benefit of your child will have absolutely no benefit at all. Now that we have the worst of the news out of the way though, on to a few better notes. In terms of proposals, the home inspections are completed, and it appears that everyone has been at least asked to sign the petition for a complete remodeling of the town, if not having actually signed it. Most of you have signed, so the few who haven't shouldn't hurt the chances for the rest of us. The petition will leave when the rotating Queensguard arrive and return back to Queenstown. Also, as for the list on the Dove board, the one with the candidates for town judge, there will be an extra day to add names and vote on the list, given
what we've just gone through. I would also like to mention that if your name is put forward and you don't wish to run for town judge, you can strike yourself from the list. And to that point, Gonjin has requested that I ask this evening for people to stop voting for her. She has said that she lacks any desire to be town judge. Sometimes I wonder why I want it to be. But with everything being rather serious in Maddrift right now, I do not think it would be appropriate to try lightening the mood with a story, as there's the possibility I would only make things worse reading from Dazivian Night Terrors right now. So instead, I asked the top candidates for town judge, aside from myself, Judge Tolphier, of course, if they had drafts of their town plans that I might read over the narration. My own is not yet finished, and I believe it would be in poor taste to read my own proposal without offering to do the same for others. And with Gonjin's name removed from the top candidates, aside from myself, there are Nedris, the man we all dearly appreciate who operates the Sword Desert, and Chelly, who many of us have come to know through her recent troubles and postings on the Dove board. They both submitted drafts to me, which is rather impressive considering neither of them have ever run for town judge before and they already have so much content for their yearly plan. Chelly's is a bit more straightforward in her draft, so I will read this one first.
Chelly wants the entirety of Maddrift to be moved 20 paces north and to implement a hanging punishment for repeated crimes. With the hopes that the town will receive all new buildings, relocating the town by just a few paces is perfectly reasonable and would not take any extra effort or manpower than the town is already prepared to expend. And in the event that our benevolent Empress does not believe Maddrift is in need of a complete remodeling, the rebuilding of the structures 20 paces north will be more costly, but not any less doable given the ideas for construction and accommodations Chelly has listed here in her proposal. But I won't read these bits aloud, they're a bit more complicated and detail-oriented than what the voters really need to know. What she has less clarification about in her intent is to hang people who commit repeated crimes. She lists the crevasses around Maddrift as the location, and ropes and chains can be reused from what the Feasting Death does not consume, or they can be remade as needed. It's the part of hanging people who commit the same crime or several crimes repeatedly. Alright, let me read this exactly. Hanging people who commit several crimes should deter future criminal activity and act as a means of placating the Feasting Death and perhaps training the magical abnormality to become accustomed to waiting in one area, keeping it from waiting and attacking Maddrift from unpredictable directions and times. Where I personally believe this idea needs more work is on what crimes people can be hung for and how many times the petty crimes, such as theft, can be repeated before a person is hung for it. In Chelly's proposal so far, it is plainly stated that anyone who commits any two crimes, should be hung in a crevasse to feed the Feasting Death and give Maddrift some peace. I do not want to openly, too harshly criticize either of these proposals, though. This is not the appropriate time, and these are simply drafts, not finished plans. So I'm going to move on to Nedris's proposal for Maddrift now. Nedris proposes we celebrate the day of the Feasting Death once a month rather than once a year, and rather than importing supplies for it, what the town has at the moment becomes half-priced. So nothing is free, but everything is considerably cheaper. I do not think he's finished working out the means of deciding who works and who celebrates on that day, but in alignment with how the celebration is already slated to happen as things currently stand, the Queensguard remain responsible for patrolling Maddrift and helping with manual labour where necessary. Nedris also wants to inquire to the officials of the palace in Queenstown, not to the Queen herself directly, about lowering taxes for Maddrift and potentially getting rid of them entirely in return for something. He has yet to figure out what that something Maddrift will give in return is, but as I said, this is just a draft, so that's not something anyone should get stuck on at the moment listening to this proposal.
Nedris also has the idea to deepen the crevasses that are permanent around Maddrift. We've all seen one or two open up and close within a few months following, but we are all also well aware of the distant crevasses that have always been around, that are nearly as old as the oldest of us here. His plan is to dig pits further within them and perhaps widen them, the beginning steps of creating a hollow moat around Maddrift. That is to say, stretching well beyond just a year, with no end date in sight at all, but Nedris wants to dig a crevasse around Maddrift so that the Feasting Death will have to take a longer time to crawl to us. However, I do see that it may unintentionally be trapped closer to us if things go poorly, and people can come and go by bridge, I suppose, but I am just assuming that last part, as Nedris left out anything about a bridge in his hollow moat. But that is what I have from the two of them. Thank you, Chele, and thank you, Nedris. You have some very fine points and plans that you are working on. With those two read, I'll now read a bit of my own draft. I haven't started fully on the second year part of my plans for Maddrift, but the first year proposal has come along in its major points. Hopefully reading it aloud here will help me solidify or change some of my ideas, as well as continue to pass the time this evening. I also intend to seriously look into building a wall, or a series of walls, around Maddrift to help deter the Feasting Death. I do not intend to make a thick, impenetrable fortress around the town, but if we could create a maze, then the Feasting Death would have a harder time getting to us. And if the maze of walls can be outfitted with guards and doors or pitfalls and other such trap-like accommodations, perhaps in time we can stop the Feasting Death from getting to us at all, and drive it into a corner where it may eventually even starve. However, I must point out the flaws in my own plan, as I mildly did to Chele and Nedris. It would not be fair otherwise. The Feasting Death continues to surprise us when we think we've learned something new. We don't actually know what shape the core part of the magical abomination is. Since it looks like vapor and smoke most often, it could potentially rise above any wall or slip through the cracks of a door, and while we know it bears weight because we can hear it moving across the ground, especially after it has eaten, we don't know if it can if it can stumble, if we can make it fall, which would make a deep crevasse or a pit trap quite useless if it can't. Not to mention that we've never faced the Feasting Death when it was starving, and seeing how it is already capable of inescapable horrors when it's just a little bit hungry, I do not know if I want to put Maddrift at further risk by trying to starve the Feasting Death and potentially making it angry, if not... Angry is not quite a fitting word. Furious doesn't quite do the image in my mind justice either, but I'm sure you understand my meaning, Maddrift, even if I cannot conjure the right word to describe it. But another plan I had was to create public gardens around the arcane lamps. So long as there are no more accidents such as the one before, where the lamp shattered and destroyed all the objects below it, the artificial light they provide should be enough for a garden, and those of you who have meal insecurities will not need to look so hard for something to sustain yourselves. If we could get something like corn or wheat to grow in them, they could be given to the notable cooks in town, and some more meals could then be given out free of charge as a means of boosting town morale for a bit. And of course, those who do the labor of cooking and serving will be compensated by the town funds, and those who routinely look after the garden will be as well. Not much of a compensation, but enough to keep the morale up for everyone. Those are the only real points I have solidified in my plan so far. The wall would take 2 years at least, especially if made into a maze, because safe routes for Queensguard will need to be marked out somehow, and the other topics strike me as doable in a year or less, but I will continue with my second year plans to really flesh out my hopes for Maddrift before the election is properly held, and solidify my plans for the upcoming year as well. That is all for this announcement. We are still grieving those we lost, and I ask for your patience in reuniting those who have yet to be found or who have been found and just aren't quite ready to return to their loved ones yet. Have a wonderful evening, Maddrift. We will now stop the recording and replay it.